Okay, time to start diving into some of the important aspects to ecology, and one of the best places for us to start with are two processes that you're probably familiar with, one of them more so than the others, but essentially these two long nerdy words here, photosynthesis and the phrase cellular respiration. They sound rather intense and intimidating, but really what it all comes down to is perhaps one of the most important aspects of ecology, and that's the idea of energy. Because recall back in the very beginning of this course when we talked about the characteristics of life, one of the main characteristics that we said was that if an organism is alive, or in order for an organism to be alive, for something to be considered alive, it must obtain and use energy. You have to have a way to get energy somehow. And if we focus on that with this video, what we're going to see is that we really have got to start at the most important place, the ultimate source, if you will, of that being the sun. Now, stop and think about that for a second. I'm sure you may have a little bit of prior knowledge as to why we decide to start with this glowing ball of gases, and why we're going to deal with that in terms of energy. So let's focus on this idea of energy, where it comes from, and really in a subtle overview, without getting into too much detail in this video, kind of how it's passed around. Because everybody has to get it, everybody wants it, everybody needs it. That's the name of the game. So obviously, if we're going to be starting with the sun, we know that energy has to be harnessed by what we call, the term for them are autotrophs. Now, in this term, auto, think like automatically. An automatic transmission means it shifts on its own. So auto means all on its own, by yourself. And this root word troph refers to feeding. So the organisms that we have listed here, plants, types of algae, other phytoplankton, and even many kinds of bacteria, think green for the most part in this case, are autotrophs. They can actually take energy from the sun and harness that energy into a usable form for them. In other words, they're making their own food. Now, with that being said, I'm sure you are already well aware of how they do this. That process, as we said, photosynthesis, we'll look at in a moment. But before we do that, let's focus on what about someone like us? Humans, we obviously cannot make our own food, so we are consumers. We have to consume it. We have to take it in. We have to eat that. And the scientific term for that, in addition to consumer, would be heterotroph. Remember, troph meaning food. Hetero means other, or opposite, meaning it can't come from you, it's got to come from somewhere else. So you've got to eat your food. You've got to eat other organisms, whether they're plants, or in this guy's case, ouch, could be other animals. Some of us do a mix of both. Some of us are just vegetarians. Some of us are, well, I doubt just carnivores. I hope you're not. But in this case, like the great white shark, think about, use some of your knowledge of organic compounds. He's going to eat the seal. Now, before you feel badly for the seal, if we were to hit rewind 20 minutes ago, this seal was doing the same thing to fish. So, don't feel badly for him. It's all part of nature. But as the shark eats the seal, he will obviously swallow and begin digesting chemical reactions, breaking apart the carbs, lipids, proteins in this organism and turning them into usable energy, just like you do with a piece of pizza. So those are really our two options, either autotrophic or heterotrophic. So what we want to do here quickly is just look at some of the important details of each of the process of both photosynthesis and this idea of turning food into energy, cellular respiration, so we have a working definition and idea, and we can proceed from there. Because again, this is the major focal point of ecology. So how we're getting our food, like we said, autotrophs can make their own food. Heterotrophs have to get their food by consuming others. I'm actually kind of afraid of cows, and I'm only half kidding there. Long story. I can explain that to you at the end of the year. But they've chosen this image because it shows the relationship of both. The cow, which one would that be? Autotroph or heterotroph? And the grass, the taller reeds, the corn in the back, the trees in the very far back. Everything in this image is one or the other. And they do have a unique relationship. So with that in mind, the overview of photosynthesis in this cheesy little hand-drawn cartoon, but it shows us some very, very important ideas that we need to make sure that we are well aware of. So here is our photosynthesizer, the plant. As we can see, it's a strawberry plant. Love strawberries. So with, as we mentioned, our sun over here, the plants are absorbing that sunlight, but notice very, very important right here, and to a certain extent right here, kind of hidden on the side, but not part of the equation directly. Plants have to take in carbon dioxide, as we said, CO2. They also have to take in water. Now, something we can see down here, that CO2 actually enters through tiny holes on the undersides of the leaves called stomata. So the gas can go in. Once it's inside of these leaf areas, water can be, as we said, absorbed by the roots. And once they have these three factors, sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water, a series of chemical reactions, which we learned about last unit, occur inside of the plant. We'll look at where more specifically. And so we can think of this side as our reactants, this side as our products. The plants actually will give off oxygen out of those same holes, and the ultimate goal is that they convert all of that stuff into making complex sugars, carbohydrates, and that is the food for the plants. In this case, they show it coming out of the strawberry, but actually even within the cells of the plant, that is occurring as well. So very, very rather simple process. The chemistry behind it, if you take AP biology, we learn in great detail, but for now it's a rather simple process and one that you're probably very, very familiar with. So if we were to write that out in equations in terms of chemical reactions, which we looked at last unit, here it is. There's our carbon dioxide molecules and our water. Now, one thing that is important to note here that doesn't appear because it's not actually a molecule is that we can't forget about light. Many times scientists will write that above the arrow. Remember, the arrow means chemical reaction. So they take in CO2, take in water, sunlight, and they convert it to C6H12O6. What's that? What is C6H12O6? In this case, it can be, in one form, the most common form would be glucose, a sugar, and the plants give off oxygen as a byproduct. So there is the way we write the equation. Yes, you do have to know that. We have to know the reactants and the products to understand this, but it's a pretty simple, without getting into too much of the chemistry, a pretty simple equation. And again, one that you're probably very familiar with. Now, a couple of very important things. Now, what gives the plants this unique ability to absorb sunlight? We haven't looked at cell structure and function yet, but if we were to look here, each one of these boxes under a microscope, you can see the arrow here in the microscopic view pointing. This is a cell. Each rectangular box is a plant cell. And notice in here these little green discs and circles. Those discs are little pigment-filled shaped organelles filled with chlorophyll, this green pigment, and that is actually what allows the cells, and in turn the plant, to absorb sunlight. In here, predominantly inside of the chloroplast itself is where this process is occurring. And you can see there's a huge number of them. So these chemical reactions are occurring ad nauseum all throughout the plant. And then we can see that light, recall from physical science, is made up of a spectrum of colors. Notice that the absorbance, how well they absorb that, very well in this bluish end of the spectrum, pretty well in the reddish end. Notice they don't absorb green really, hardly at all. The green is reflected for the most part, at least from chlorophyll it is, and that's what gives the plant its predominantly green color. So they absorb this sunlight and convert that into food. Kind of a neat trick. So again, if we go back to the equation, make sure you can account for everything, knowing where it's coming from, how it's getting in there, and what the ending products are. So there's the food. They've turned energy and the light that we had written up here into food. And obviously, if we think about that a lot of factors can affect how well plants are doing that. If it's too cold, remember temperature can affect enzymes. Not enough light or too much light, not enough water, same thing. If you don't give it the reactants it needs, or you give it, in some cases, too much of it, that'll affect rates as well. So rather important there. So that's one half of our problem. That takes care of our autotrophs. But If you think about it, that's only part of the battle because all they did is make food. How, though, are we going to digest that food? How do plants digest the food and turn it into energy? And how do any of the heterotrophs that eat food, how do they turn it into energy? So we need to look at that aspect. How do you turn the food? Again, breaking down carbs, breaking down lipids, and converting them into energy through chemical reactions. So remember that on food labels, we can see here that this concept of calories, notice that within here, carbohydrates in the form of sugars and fiber, even in fats, and in some specialized cases, even proteins, but predominantly carbohydrates. A calorie is the amount of energy stored in that food. So if you break down these chemical compounds, it'll release, in one serving size, 90 calories of energy. So how do we do that? It's through a process called cellular respiration. Now that word respiration, think about what that means. If we say to respire, inside of the cells, hopefully you can pick up on the fact that that word is associated with breathing. Oxygen in, CO2 out. That's how we breathe. So it's in a special organ, and again, we have yet to cover cell structure and function, but these bean, kidney-shaped organs in our cells, both plant and animal cells have them, called mitochondria. And these are like the powerhouses in these kidney bean-shaped structures. What they actually will do is they'll take food molecules and oxygen in and break it down into energy. So I've written the reaction kind of in a strange way here, but you can see that, again, there's our glucose, our sugar. Here's our oxygen, breathing that in. And then this chemical reaction, remember, means reacts as equation, turns it into CO2, water, and the big part, yes, is the energy. That's the part we want. It gives off a lot of energy for one molecule. Remember, this is a carbohydrate. There's energy stored in here. We can break the bonds and give off some other products and convert that into energy. Very, very nice trick. And again, both plants and animals do that. Now, one thing that's really nice, look at that equation. If you notice, it's actually the opposite, literally the opposite of photosynthesis. Plants took in CO2, water, and energy in the form of light and turned it into sugar and oxygen. Amazing, amazing, amazing. So we can see a great relationship here that here's a chloroplast. They're taking in carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight, bunch of chemical reactions, turn it into this organic molecules, carbs for the most part, and oxygen. And in the other part of our cells and in other organisms, they can take in that food, either if it's already in the cells, if you're a plant and you made it, and oxygen, or if you eat it, like the shark eating the seal, break down those carbohydrates through a bunch of reactions here in the mitochondria, and that releases this little explosion here, ATP, is a form of energy. It's a molecule that's energy our cells can use. And we also notice lose a lot of heat energy. Think when you run around, you're generating a lot of energy. You also generate a lot of heat. And the beautiful part is that the waste products that are given off from cellular respiration, carbon dioxide and water, are then used by the photosynthesizers again. It's a perfect relationship. Both parties are winning. One hand washes the other. Pick your little metaphor here. And it works out great. Because if we think about it, sum that up and zoom back out to our ugly, scary cow here. I'm afraid of cows. One arrow in, arrow out. The products of one process are the reactants of another. In other words, what photosynthesis gives off, cellular respiration uses. And what cellular respiration gives off, the photosynthesizers use. So in this grand scheme of things, autotrophs and heterotrophs are very, very closely knit and dependent upon one another. If you start messing with one, remember our butterfly effect, the other one will be affected. A lot of this will allow for a lot of that. Not enough of this will allow for not enough of that. The two go hand in hand. It's beautiful.